In the summer of 1976, a school bus driver named Mary Gillespie opened her mailbox and found a letter with no return address. It was postmarked from Columbus, about 30 miles north. Inside, someone had written in bold, blocky capital letters that they knew Mary was having an affair with Gordon Massey, the superintendent of schools. The letter warned her to stop. It said the writer had been watching her house. It said the writer knew she had children. So Mary was shaken, but she kept the letter to herself. She told no one. But then a second letter arrived, and then a third. And then her husband Ron started getting them too. But his letters were more direct. They told him that if he could not make his wife stop seeing Gordon Massey, he would be killed. So Mary and Ron finally told the only people they trusted, Ron's sister and her husband, a man named Paul Freshour. The four of them sat down and made a list of suspects. They even sent their own letters to those suspects, warning them to stop. And for a little while, the letters did stop. But then they started again, worse than before. By mid-1977, the letters were arriving constantly. They were angrier, they were more detailed, and they weren't just targeting Mary anymore. Other people in town were getting them too. Letters filled with accusations of fraud, corruption, and affairs that no one was supposed to know about. And then, on the night of August 19, 1977, the phone rang at the Gillespie house. Ron picked up, and whatever was said on the other end of that call changed him immediately. He hung up, grabbed his .22 caliber revolver, and told his children he knew who the letter writer was. He was going to confront them, and he walked out the door. Ron Gillespie would never walk back through it. About 50 minutes later, his pickup truck was found wrapped around a tree on 5 Point Pike. Ron was dead inside the cab, massive internal injuries. His gun was found underneath his body. It had been fired exactly once. But no bullet casings were found at the scenes. No bullet holes in the truck. No bullet holes in any tree or fence. No evidence that the bullet hit anything at all. So, what did Ron shoot at? Or who shot at Ron? No one has ever been able to answer that question. And here's where the first strange twist appears. Ron's autopsy came back with a blood alcohol level of 0.16, more than twice the legal limit. Therefore, the sheriff ruled it an accident. A drunk driver who lost control. Case closed. But Ron's family said that was impossible. They insisted Ron was not a drinker, that he had been completely sober when he left the house, that no one could explain how a man who left his home angry and clear-headed ended up dead with that much alcohol in his blood within the hour. But nobody listened. After Ron's death, you might expect the letters to stop, but instead they exploded. New letters arrived accusing the sheriff of covering up Ron's murder. Other letters targeted people across town with accusations that turned out to be disturbingly accurate. Over the next several years, more than 1,000 anonymous letters would circulate through Circleville, and then something else happened. After Ron died, Mary Gillespie and Gordon Massey admitted that the affair was real. They claimed it had only started after the letters began, but not everyone believed that, which meant the letter writer had been right all along. And that made everything more terrifying, because if the writer was right about the affair, what else were they right about? The letters continued for 6 more years, but in 1983, the writer crossed a new line. By this point, the anonymous author had started posting handmade signs along Mary's school bus route. Vulgar, degrading signs. But on the afternoon of February 7th, 1983, Mary was driving her empty bus to pick up students when she spotted a sign that made her blood run cold. This one was about her 12-year-old daughter. It accused the child of being involved with Gordon Massey. Mary pulled over. She had had enough. She stormed up to the sign and tried to tear it down. But something felt wrong. The sign was nailed to a post, and attached to the post was a piece of twine that led to a small box sitting on the ground. Mary hesitated, but she took the box. She loaded it onto the bus, and she continued her route, driving down county roads to pick up school children with this strange contraption rattling on the floor beside her. It was not until she got home and finally pried the box open that she realized what she was holding. Inside was a loaded .25 caliber pistol, and the gun had been rigged to fire the moment someone pulled on the sign. It was a booby trap, and it had failed to go off only because of a mechanical malfunction. If it had worked, Mary Gillespie would have been shot dead on the side of the road while her school bus sat empty behind her, waiting for children who would never be picked up. Therefore, the sheriff launched an investigation. The gun was traced to a man in Columbus who said he had sold it to a co-worker. And that co-worker was Paul Freshour, Ron Gillespie's brother-in-law, the same man who had sat at that kitchen table years earlier helping Mary and Ron make their list of suspects. So Paul was arrested and charged with attempted murder in October of 1983. He denied everything. He said the gun had been stolen from him weeks before. He had an alibi for the afternoon the booby trap was placed. There were no fingerprints on the box, no fingerprints on the gun, and no physical evidence tying him to the device. But prosecutors brought in 2 handwriting analysts who said the writing on the anonymous letters could be Paul's. What they did not tell the jury was how that analysis was conducted. Paul had not been asked to provide a natural writing sample, the standard method in forensic analysis. Instead, he had been told to sit down and copy one of the Circleville letters word for word, stroke for stroke. That method virtually guarantees the handwriting will look similar. It is a technique so unreliable that it is not accepted in the standard forensic practice. But it was never challenged. But it was enough. The jury convicted Paul Freshour. He received the maximum sentence of 7 to 25 years. And the people of Circleville finally exhaled. The nightmare was over. The letters would stop. The town could heal. Except it wasn't over. Not even close. Within weeks of Paul's conviction, new letters started arriving, and with the same handwriting, same blocky capital letters, same intimate knowledge of the town's secrets, and this time Paul Freshour was sitting in a prison cell. Therefore, investigators checked. They confirmed that Paul was in solitary confinement for part of his sentence. He was denied access to pen and paper. He couldn't have been sending letters. The prison launched its own internal investigation and concluded the same thing, that Paul Freshour was not the one writing the letters. But the letters kept coming, and some were postmarked from cities far from the prison. Others arrived in towns Paul had never even visited, and in the most chilling twist of all, Paul himself received a letter in his cell. Inside, the anonymous writer taunted him. It read, "Now when are you going to believe you are not going to get out of there?" Think about what that means. Someone out there had framed Paul Freshour, watched him get convicted, watched him get locked away, and then picked out a pen to gloat about it. Whoever was writing this letter was not just a gossip. They were something far more dangerous. So if Paul didn't write the letters, who did? Suspicion fell in several directions. Some pointed to Paul's ex-wife, Karen Sue Freshour, who was Ron Gillespie's sister. Their divorce had been bitter. She had access to Paul's gun. She could have planted the booby trap and framed him, but no charges were ever filed. Others noticed that some of the early letters had been signed with a single initial, the letter W. That led to speculation about William Massey, the superintendent's son, who may have wanted to end his father's affair. And then there was the detail that police were criticized for never following up on. Another bus driver had been on the road the day Mary found the booby trap. That driver reported seeing a man standing near a yellow El Camino at the exact intersection where the sign was placed, just 20 minutes before Mary arrived. The man looked nothing like Paul Freshour. He was never identified. But perhaps the most unsettling detail is this. The letter writer was not just a gossip. They were right about almost everything. The coroner who had performed Ron's autopsy, a man named Dr. Ray Carroll, was accused in the letters of being a predator. Years later, he was officially charged with 12 counts involving crimes against minors. The prosecutor who convicted Paul Freshour was accused in the letters of having an affair with a woman who later turned up dead. That affair was confirmed. He was even found to be the father of her unborn child. The Circleville letter writer, whoever they were, did not just know secrets. They knew the kind of secrets that powerful people would do anything to keep buried. So Paul Freshour served 10 years in prison. He was released in 1994, and almost immediately after his release, the letters stopped. Some people saw that as proof of his guilt, that the letters ended when he got out because he no longer needed to prove his innocence. But others saw it differently. Maybe the real writer had accomplished what they set out to do. Maybe they had finally gotten bored, or maybe they had simply died. Paul spent the rest of his life trying to clear his name. He contacted the FBI and asked them to reopen the case, but they never responded. He spoke to journalists. He maintained a blog. He told anyone who would listen that he had been framed. Paul Freshour died in 2012, still maintaining his innocence, and his son, Mark, had already taken his own life a decade earlier. The weight of whatever this family had been dragged through was more than he could carry. To this day, no one has ever been officially identified as the Circleville letter writer. The case remains open. More than 1,000 letters were sent over nearly 20 years. A man is dead under suspicious circumstances. Another man lost a decade of his life in prison, and a booby trap nearly killed a mother on a school bus route. Somewhere in that small Ohio town, someone knew everything about everyone. They watched, they wrote it down, and they mailed it. And the scariest part is not that they were never caught. The scariest part is that almost everything they wrote turned out to be true. My name is Jesus Enrique Rosas. I'm the crime coroner. Much love and bliss.